Basically, a college professor of mine sat me down and said, I don't say this very often, but if you have the interest, I think you have the potential to go to MIT for grad school. I grew up in a really small town. My parents didn't go to college. MIT was, something that people talked about in movies. It wasn't necessarily something that I thought was, I don't know, attainable or possible. And so when this professor said this, and by the way, that professor got his PhD from MIT, so it had some credibility, his statement, that sort of changed a lot in my mind. And I really was a big moment where I felt that somebody else recognized that I could, get to a higher level. And I leaned in and I ended up ultimately going to MIT for grad school afterwards.
Hey, I'm Bryan Wish, and welcome back to the One Away Show. Today's guest is Mike Lloyd, an engineer, entrepreneur, and operator with a rare combination of discipline, curiosity, and depth. Mike shares the one mentor who changed everything, his college professor who first planted the seed that he could go to MIT. That single moment led a path from small-town Michigan to startups, venture capital, and building some of the most innovative insurance companies in the country. In this conversation, we talk about the humbling experience of MIT, the 3 a.m. wake-ups that fuel his focus, and how one early startup failure laid the foundation for success with Corvus and now Pineview Insurance Group. It's a story about resilience, alignment, and what it means to take ownership of your own arc. Let's get into it. Mike, welcome to the One Away Show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. Mike, it's been great getting to know you. And so I'm really excited to dive in. What is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
It's hard to decide, but when I think back on my career and journey personally and professionally, there was a moment when I was about 20 years old that, I guess to use your terminology, I would call it the one mentor away moment, where basically a college professor of mine sat me down and said, I don't say this very often, but if you have the interest, I think you have the potential to go to MIT for grad school. And I grew up in a really small town. My parents didn't go to college. MIT was, something that people talked about in movies. It wasn't necessarily something that I thought was, I don't know, attainable or possible. And so when this professor said this, and by the way, that professor got his PhD from MIT, so it had some credibility, his statement, that sort of changed a lot in my mind. And I really was a big moment where I felt that somebody else recognized that I could, get to a higher level. And I leaned in and I ended up ultimately going to MIT for grad school afterwards. And, there was a lot of work and different things I had to do to get there, but it was a pretty cool moment. And really a lot of that comes down to mentorship and one individual, this professor named Professor Matthew Heyer, leaning in and helping me.
Wow. So I didn't know that about your parents. Not that that's a bad thing. That's just where the circumstances and how you grew up. So my question for you is, what were your aspirations as a kid? Like what were the things that you were thinking about, talking about? Like what was kind of the life of Mike during the early years?
When I was younger, I grew up in a small town outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my parents both worked at what I would call small town businesses. So my mother worked as a procurement person at a machinery shop, basically, and my father had a handful of jobs, but he was a salesman for a while, and then worked on also big machinery, but more in like a service department type thing. And so when I thought of what a career looked like, you sort of hear about the big companies and you can go get those kinds of jobs. But a lot of my firsthand experience for my family was sort of small town USA,
Mm.
these small local towns. And so, early on, just like most kids, I don't think I was really probably thinking too much about it. But I definitely was shaped by this idea of sort of just making more money than my parents had. And a lot of that was driven by because my mother in particular uh, frequently talked about how we couldn't do certain things because we didn't have enough money. Now, whether or not that was true or it was just a convenient excuse in the moment, I'm not sure. But it was um, very influential on in my mind where I was like, okay, well, if we just had more money, we could do these things that I want to do, but we cannot do because we don't have enough money for it. And I'm not talking crazy things. I'm talking about just like maybe some vacations or playing in some fancier soccer team or whatever it may be. And so, anyways, that was a pretty influential thing from my childhood was thinking like, okay, well, like having more money is solves some of these problems that seem to be problems, but probably weren't. So I sort of put myself a little bit on like, okay, well, how do you do that? And then that led me towards business. And I always was pretty interested in business and entrepreneurship. In fact, one of the foundational stories of my life was back in the late 90s. My aunt, who actually worked at Cisco Systems as an early employee and did quite well there, she was probably the wealthiest person I knew growing up. She had a nephew that actually introduced me to, so a cousin that introduced me to an MP3. And so I was basically like fascinated by this new technology that I thought only existed in California and these old, 56K modems back in the day. And so I brought that back to Michigan and was able to essentially just like really be helpful to my friends because I was able to sort of create custom CDs with before people had CD burners. I went and bought a burner and for like 6 months before everyone had burners and Napster, I was like able to bring this technology into the world and create happiness. And so that's like fundamentally what entrepreneurship is in so many ways. And so I was always drawn to that. And so I viewed that as a way where like, okay, I could be an entrepreneur and make money. And the person who owns the small business that my parents worked at was seemingly better off than my parents. So like that was sort of the step.
Mm.
But yeah, put all that together and there's a lot of foundational stuff there that I think led me towards business and specifically entrepreneurship.
But it sounds like, just to kind of replay back to what I heard properly, kind of the lack of resourcing growing up, you saw entrepreneurship as kind of the gateway and being a business owner to really overcoming kind of that problem and that you had for yourself, where it's like you solve your own problem with entrepreneurship to solve other people's problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge, huge. When one of the beautiful things about the United States is in so many ways, effort is rewarded. And it's something where entrepreneurship is something where, you need a bit of luck, but a lot of it comes down to just effort and hopefully making some good decisions, smart decisions, and it works out. So yeah, it's a great, great fit for who I am.
Yeah, no, it's neat to see the small town roots blossoming. So back to your professor, um, you said his name was, you see Matthew, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Matt Hire.
Higher. So you said he saw something in you, and he said there's a pasture that maybe wasn't in your realm of consciousness or immediate realm of consciousness, but maybe he saw something that was greater for you. What do you think it was about him or even you, right? That kind of brought you two together to kind of build that relationship and see there's something greater here.
He invited me to be an intern for him in the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. And I had him as a professor my sophomore year. And so I think he saw me in class and knew that I had potentially the aptitude, to be a good intern. And then I spent the summer with him in Connecticut and his family, and we were basically doing computational fluid dynamics on glass bottle making, which was pretty interesting. But in any case, we were working really closely together for the summer. We got to know each other both personally and I would say professionally. And I'm not sure exactly what he saw, but I think from, if I had to read between the lines, I think that he saw that I had the IQ to get in. But there's a lot of people that have potentially the IQ. I think what he saw was potentially the drive and potentially the maturity, the emotional maturity to go into such an intense environment and be able to make it. Um, I can't explain how different the learning environment is at a place like MIT when it comes to, engineering and some of these sort of hard sciences. In many ways, they design the curriculum to sort of make sure you know that you have a long way to go. It's not, it's like everything's graded on a curve, at least when I was there. And there are all of these constant sort of reminders that you are still early in your learning journey. Because a lot of people that get there were always at the sort of the top of their classes, and then you put a bunch of people that were at the top of their class into one room, and you sort of need to create new ways to create spread and get people to keep leaning forward to be the best versions of themselves. And so I think that that takes a level of emotional maturity. And my guess is that Matt Heyer saw that I could probably handle it. And I had the other sort of prereqs, which I would just say are generally IQ and drive to get in.
Nice, nice. And when you so he saw this in you, right? And you had the drive, you had the IQ, you had the emotional readiness to maybe take on something greater. But you also interned for him. You spent a summer with him. You followed him and his suggestions. Like what did you see in him that made you say, this is someone kind of worth following into the wilderness, at a young age?
I was really impressed that he went to MIT for his PhD. I really liked the subject matter that was his focus and still is computational fluid dynamics, which is a pretty interesting part of mechanical engineering. It's essentially modeling the world and fluids, and then then sort of looking at different simulations and what happens if you so like for example, airplanes, when you design an airplane wing, you basically can design the plane using CFD or computational fluid dynamics and test the lift and run air over a new wing design before you actually spend the money to build the actual wing. So that's just one example, but I was very focused on modeling buildings and energy efficiency and airflow in buildings. I don't do any of this stuff today, but that was essentially what his expertise was, and it was pretty interesting. It was basically using data centers and hardcore computers to run a bunch of simulations and design and try to model the world.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I just really liked him as a human, and I really just thought he was smart and the stuff he was doing was interesting, and so it worked.
Interesting. Sounds like the intellectual curiosity that you had as well, and his background. You could see greater things for yourself. So super cool that you had someone. And just for context of this conversation, how old were you at that time?
I was in college and I went right out of high school, so I was probably 20.
When you look back and reflect on the MIT education that you had, what do you think it kind of still sticks with you to this day as profound lessons?
It was a very humbling experience for me. I finished college with a near 4.0 GPA. I was the valedictorian of my class, just sort of on top of the world when it came to intellectual academics. And I went up to MIT and I remember I got a 27% on my first test. And I could not have felt more out of place. And like I made a huge mistake um, when that happened. I learned very quickly that 27% was actually sort of middle of the pack because everything was on gray. That was like the absolute percentage. And then, they put it onto a normal distribution. But in any case, it was just very, very humbling. I was very much middle of the road or bottom. I was not in the upper quartile of engineering talent and horsepower there. And that was sort of a new feeling, but it is what it is, to a certain extent. There are just some people that are so gifted in whatever the craft is, be it a sport or some intellectual thing or just anything, right? Just the way the world works. They're just outliers. And a lot of the outliers tend to go to MIT. And it was something where it was just a very humbling experience for me. So emotionally, it was a very hard adjustment. Now, I did adjust, I did graduate, I got it done, but it wasn't something where I enjoyed it or thrived. Uh, and so one of the things that I like to say I learned from my MIT experience is this: just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I could and did get into MIT. I could and I did graduate, but I wasn't really exactly what I wanted to do. And I think a part of me wanted to do it because I found it to be a very validating place to be at. Like, oh, I'm an MIT student, and getting that degree is validation that I'm worth more or something. So I think a lot of that comes back to this, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. There's a lot of things that you probably can do, but like, what should you do? I think is a big question that people should ask themselves. So what's really cool though is MIT is a hotbed for startups. And it basically sits right next to Harvard. And so there's a lot of really fun tech startup energy in that general Cambridge community. And I found that while I was there, and that was very much fun. And that's what I leaned into. So I even considered leaving school early a few times, not to work on some startup, but just because it just didn't feel right. I was much more excited about tech startups. And so yeah, anyways, I it was sort of a hard journey, but it introduced me to the tech startup community of Cambridge. And I really leaned in. And from there, I never looked back. I've only worked at or with tech startups since that moment.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because my next question was what kept you there. But it seems like from your childhood experiences building your own business, you had the firsthand, it was in your backyard, some more, so to speak, with some of the brightest in the world. So it makes total sense. Um, you mentioned it being humbling, being in the classroom with some of the brightest, but then kind of finding this outlet and ideas and building. Uh, Tell me, tell us a little bit more about once you kind of saw this avenue to maybe your people or your future, where you started to kind of plant yourself or things you started to take on that kind of captured your early interest.
I remember going to, I believe it was a Harvard MIT pitch event for startups, where essentially a founder or entrepreneur would stand up in front of a room and have like a minute to tell people about their startup. And I believe the purpose of that meeting was partially if somebody is an investor and wants to invest, but partially if somebody wants to join or be an employee. And so I went to one of those, and I remember hearing a gentleman named Shelby Clark pitch. Shelby Clark at the time was the founder of a company called Relay Rides. Relay Rides, he was an HBS graduate or HBS student at the time. And so I remember in his pitch, he said something like Google Ventures, invested or is going to invest or something. And, I didn't really know anything about tech startups, but this guy had a great little pitch and he said, Google's going to invest. And so I just walked right up to him afterwards and said, I want to help you. You don't need to pay me or give me anything. I just want to help. And so it was fun because he basically let me help him. And I helped in the early days of Relay Rides. Relay Rides eventually became a company called Turo, Turo, which is the car sharing service that
Mm.
is, yeah, is I believe a public company at this point. So it became a unicorn, and I never got a share. I never asked for anything, but way in my like the depths of my email, I had this old Relay Rides email that I helped basically with just probably the most simple, boring parts of company building. I can't remember a project that I did, but I was just trying to find ways to be helpful. So that was just an early experience. And I didn't know at the time it was going to be, successful, but I just loved this idea of we've got to go solve 45 problems at one time. Like, how can I help type thing? And so that was the beginning of my, I would say professional entrepreneurial journey. The personal entrepreneurial journey was this ridiculous CD thing back in the day. But yeah, helping Shelby Clark with the early days of Relay Rides and Naturo was where it all sort of started from when I was a student at MIT.
Wow, wow, that's super cool. I mean, like you seem to uh have this just relational. I mean, so just to build on this for a second, you talked about maybe like the IQ of IQs that MIT wasn't maybe up there in the top percentile, but you had the EQ and maturity in that level. And what I've always loved about you is just your conversational ability. Back then, like, do you think that what you thought about relationships and kind of harnessing and kind of, I mean, you opened the door for yourself, right? Like if we put it in simple terms, like you saw something interesting, you saw success potential, and you said, "Hey, like let me go see if I can kind of make an opportunity for myself." But you had to kind of create that opportunity. Like, when you kind of look back to that moment in time, like what were your relational abilities like in terms of how you built relationships and created opportunities for yourself?
I feel like I've always had to create something from nothing. Um, and that's probably being a little hyperbolic. There's always something you're standing on when you're moving forward. And um, but I do think that a vast majority of the progress I've made in my career and personally has been just the product of hard work and just basically you have to go figure it out. The world is not really oriented in such a way where things come to you. In many ways, you have to go get them. And I've learned that as a kid. And I think that I embrace that now. I mean, even to this day, I try to be one of the hardest working people. And, if there's something that needs to get done, wait for it to come my way. I just go try to figure out how to do it. Just go do it. There's definitely a level of eagerness and leaning forward that is probably innate to who I am.
Yeah, totally. I mean, not to go too far off topic here, but I want to come back to startups and kind of share a bit more of the journey. But where did your 3:30, 4 a.m. Wake up time come from? Because I know that's something that you're up quite early, crack of dawn. When did that start?
There's only so much time in the day. And I'm somebody that likes to think I can do it all. Be a good husband, be a good father, be a good professional, um, ideally be a good friend and take care of the house or whatever else is on the to-do list. And so, for me, I'm definitely a morning person. I'm not a night owl. And so, very much at the end of the day, my brain is mush. And so it's easier for me to be sharp in the morning than at night. And the way that my life is oriented right now, because I have three little kids, that is one of the only times that I can basically be productive without interruption. Um, and my mind is sharp. I could stay up later than other people in my house, but it doesn't work well with my body. I'm just more of an early riser. So yeah, frequently I'll set my alarm for 3:30 in the morning, just because I can then get 3 hours, maybe 4 hours of work done before people start waking up. And to me, it's not like a flex. It's just by necessity, because as soon as people get up, I want to be a present father and husband, and then go do the normal work stuff. And then in the evening, it's the same. I try my best to be present as a father and husband, and then come 8 o'clock, when the kids go to bed, spend time with my wife because I want to be a good husband. There's when that comes in, and then basically go to bed, right? 9:30 or 10. So I don't stay up late, but I do tend to get up quite early.
Yeah. No, it's something I've always been impressed about kind of how you manage it all. So, I appreciate you sharing the story about what became Toro. Uh, I want to hear about the startup journey. I mean, you've done a number of things. I know you had the first company that you kind of tell us about the first company. I know I don't want to spill the beans, but kind of what was it? How'd you find it? Where did you strike first?
So the first legitimate tech backed company that I started and raised venture capital for was in 2015. So this was right after I graduated from business school. And basically during business school, I worked with this venture firm called FJ Labs. And they are very prolific marketplace investors, but they also have an incubation arm. And so they look to partner with 1, 2 people per year to build a company. And I was lucky enough to be one of those EIRs for FJ Labs. So we identified building a company in insurance. And so I'm still in insurance now. But that was really the beginning of my insurance journey. And so in 2015, we had the idea of basically building an online marketplace for personal insurance and focus it on consumers. So think personal insurance for homes and autos and these types of things. And so we started to build this business. It was called Poncho. And it became very apparent very quickly that we were having a major customer acquisition problem. Customer acquisition is notoriously hard in insurance distribution. And there's a reason that Geico, Liberty Mutual, Progressive, you name the nationwide, all of these companies spend, billions of dollars a year on marketing and brand awareness because it's just really hard to sell insurance to anyone, but especially to consumers because, people just don't like to think about insurance. Insurance is one of these products that it's one of the few products in the world where people pay for it but don't want to use it. Pretty much every time you give someone money, you get something in return that's either entertainment or something you actually get to touch and feel and use. So because of that and other reasons, it's just not something that people like to think about. And so I started a company thinking that we could change that. But in many ways, that's human behavior, and it's very, very, very difficult to change human behavior. And in order for us to be successful, we were going to have to raise just an astronomical amount of money and turn into just a marketing machine, and then just pray that our unit economics worked at the end. And that was not my strength and nor a journey that I wanted to go on. So put all that together, we built this very, very, very basic version of the company, but realized that it didn't have legs. And so we ultimately shut that down. So that was a failed startup right out of business school and another very humbling moment for me.
It's crazy. I mean, you showed it before about what these insurance companies do to kind of outspend and kind of eat the little guys. Now, for Poncho, I mean, my when you said FJ Labs is a prominent marketplace and you stuck with insurance, I mean, you clearly gotten to know the industry super well. Was it, hey, I'm really interested in insurance, or like that was the opportunity presented to you? And then the more you learned about it, the more you're like, hey, maybe there's just different ways to solve problems in this space. Like, I'm just curious about kind of your curiosity about the industry at large.
Back then, and I'm sure it still happens now, but back then it was sort of all the rage to bring vertical marketplaces to the horizontal platform. So think Craigslist as a massive horizontal marketplace, bunch of different categories. So there was this picture where basically people would pick one of the little blue hyperlinks on Craigslist homepage and then build a company around that little blue hyperlink. So one of the famous ones is, of course, short-term rentals, right? Airbnb built an $80 billion company, which is basically just that little blue hyperlink in Craigslist, but they built a verticalization of that category. And so, there's this really cool sort of map where it shows all the vertical companies that have been created. But then I remember one day I was just looking at the biggest industries and sectors, and you can't sell financial products through Craigslist, but when you look through the financial products and financial services sector, insurance is clearly just a massive, massive, massive part of of the world. And I just thought that was really interesting. So for me, it was a very top down type approach where I was essentially looking at the Craigslist, blue hyperlinks, trying to find if there was some, verticalized version of one of those that made a lot of sense, or just looking at big categories and then leaning in that way. And so I found insurance, didn't know anything about insurance. But really at the end, I looked at it and I said, this is a massive, massive, massive industry with really bad technology. So I'm convinced that I can find something useful to do in there. And so that was really it. I didn't have an initial passion for it. I've since grown to love it, but it's something that it started with like a top-down analysis.
No, super cool. I mean, I think it's a when you think about kind of making money, right? And going back to where even this conversation started, right? It was like kind of, I think, a good core way to think about kind of where can you make a dent and kind of continue. So when Poncho, when you realize, hey, we're gonna have to spend a ton, we're gonna have to pray the unit economics work. So hey, this isn't a path I want to continue. I mean, it sounds like it was an incredible learning experience. Obviously, not the money making experience. You ended up pursuing another company in the insurance space. Did that happen directly after? Yeah. Okay. And tell us about that.
Yeah, there was actually overlap between the two. It takes a lot of time and effort to shut a business down. People don't realize that, but there's a lot that you need to do, especially in a regulated industry like insurance. So, we decided to shut down Poncho. And so part of that experience was I was essentially looking for someone to buy the book and technology. It was a fire sale. It was definitely just like, hey, just do right by the employees and the little bit of assets we had and our investors. And one of the gentlemen that I talked to was a local insurance entrepreneur who had recently sold his brokerage about a year and a half before I met him and started a conversation. And so that was Phil Edmondson, who was my co-founder in the next business. So the long story short is I met with him to basically see if he knew anybody that might want to buy the book and the technology. And he had made a few intros and was very kind and helpful to me when I was shutting that business down. But at the end of our conversation, he said, I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and different people trying to build insurance businesses. And I think that I want to build one. And here's my idea. Is that something that you might be interested in? Because I think you could help me. Very generally speaking, he was more a long time insurance executive that likes technology, but had never built a technology company. I had only worked at technology companies and built technology companies and had a little bit of insurance experience. So it was something where there was a nice lack of overlap between our skill sets. And so I recognized that right away. And then after many conversations, the idea grew on me and we ultimately teamed up to start building what was Corvus Insurance. And so this was in early 2017. So I was basically helping launch Corvus simultaneously like disassembling desks and computers and trying to like sell them for anyone that would take them for just a few weeks. But yeah, it was back to back.
That's amazing. That he kind of took, I mean, not took you under his wing, but kind of saw you as a person to build a business with, and you kind of saw the marriage of skill sets and experiences, and said, "Hey, we could do it together." So, with what became known as Corvus, what did Corvus ultimately end up doing in the world? Kind of where did you start, and kind of how did it evolve?
Initially, the idea was multi-line, so many different insurance products, carrier focused on the middle market of commercial insurance. And so there are lots of different insurance products out there, and the middle market of commercial is a really interesting segment because people tend to spend quite a bit of money on their insurance, so they care about it. It's pretty much all sold through brokers. So in many ways, our primary customer was actually a broker because he or she would be the ones that would actually sort of present us as an option. And so we really had to convince them that we were a quality carrier. And ultimately that was the plan, build an insurance company with a bunch of different products. Very quickly into the journey, though, we realized that cyber insurance was a great use case for the technology that we were building and had built. and a really interesting category because it was growing quickly. You could sort of feel that it was going to become more and more of a fundamental obligatory product. And so we really leaned into that. So ultimately, Corvus became a cyber insurance provider. And and that was really more a narrowing rather than a pivot, for us. Like basically since day one, we knew we were going to sell insurance products through brokers to the middle market, and that's exactly what we did. We just ultimately narrowed into the one product of cyber insurance.
Interesting. And I mean, what's neat, I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like you found kind of product market fit within cyber specifically, like the fundamental, like the technology is kind of stayed the same. And once you kind of had a use case, you kind of went full bore into that use case.
It was sort of right place at the right time to a certain extent, being in cyber insurance, because people were buying more of it in terms of limit than they ever have before. They were buying it for the first time, and frankly, pricing started to go up quite a bit during our journey. And so the market was basically expanding, and there was growth sort of overall, and we were in a good position when all of that started.
Something that I want to double click on, if willing, you when we were in Boston together, I'll never forget. You said you think the outcome of Corvus could have been a lot bigger, and you talked about the other companies at Geico, et cetera, spend billions and just kind of eat you out. Why? I mean, why didn't you try and keep going? Like, it sounds like you grew it into a massive company. I mean, you had a great exit and great story to tell, but like if there's the continual opportunity, what kind of what was the reason for saying, hey, like we're gonna stop the story here and have a beautiful story, but not keep going? Like what was the reason for selling?
One of the interesting things about building, we built what's known as an MGA or an MGU. It's essentially stands for managing general agent or managing general underwriter. It's this interesting part of it's this interesting setup for an insurance entity where basically you have the underwriting pen, and so you're able to be an underwriter, but you essentially have to go and get what we called risk capital, but it's commonly known as insurance capacity. So we had to go get a balance sheet that was willing to essentially support our products. And so the way I like to describe it is you basically go out into the capital markets and you essentially try to secure somebody that will be the balance sheet for the risks that you're underwriting. And so in many ways, you co-develop the box. And as long as the risk fits inside the box, the insurance company or reinsurer will take that risk and sort of hold it on their balance sheet. We did not hold risk. We held a little bit at the end, but that was never fundamentally what we did. We were more just distribution marketing function. And so that was a really interesting time though to try to get insurance capacity specifically for cyber insurance. And if you think about this era, pretty much every insurance company realized that cyber insurance was a very important line. It was becoming right alongside all of the other sort of core primary lines that every company buys. And so because of that, a lot of the reinsurance capacity was sort of sucked up by what I would say would be more powerful players. I won't use names, but just think of the big insurance companies that have a lot of weight to throw around. They would suck up as much of the insurance capacity as they could, and that wouldn't leave a whole lot for others. So in many ways, the companies like ours and even our direct competitors, we all had varying degrees of luck of securing our own insurance capacity. But people would move in and out in terms of their interest and appetite and capacity. So I firmly believe this. If we had more access to risk capital or insurance capacity and could basically underwrite it the way that we wanted to, we could have been many multiples the size of our business. We rarely had a demand problem. It was almost always a supply problem, and the supply being the insurance capacity. So something where ultimately we decided to sell, we ultimately sold the business to Travelers, because Travelers has a massive balance sheet. And so one of the biggest problems that we always had in our business, which was securing the right risk capital, in many ways goes away. not fully, but to a certain extent, when you partner with a company like Travelers, because they have such a big balance sheet, you can start to really lean in when you want to, and sort of disconnect yourself from always being at the whim of those third party relationships and insurance capacity providers.
Got it. Yeah, no, thanks for the education. I mean, I think it's super interesting when you kind of peel back the layers of the industry, maybe something you don't realize going in and kind of crafting and innovating in the space. So, congrats on that. Sorry, it maybe wasn't the many multiples you hoped, but it sounds like a good outcome to take you to what's next. So, what's ahead for you? You are building your next insurance company. It seems pretty interesting and bootstrapped for right now, but tell us about PVIG, the focus, the goals, and what's ahead.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So, when we sold Corvus, I really started to think about what other interesting problems were around insurance. And I spent some time thinking about wind and hurricane exposure. And then I also spent some time thinking about wildfire. And then just basically because of being in the insurance space for the last 10 years, I was always unimpressed with the level of service that a lot of people get from insurance agents. And I just thought there was, a lot of opportunity to do that better, especially with AI these days. And so I'm currently doing two things. I have two companies, and they all sit under an umbrella. So I basically set up a personal investing vehicle called 5 Base Capital. And that is, again, just a personal investing vehicle. It's very focused on P&C insurance. And so for P&C insurance, one of the things that I wanted to set up was an insurance agency focused on personal lines. And so it's a little bit reminiscent of the Poncho days, but this one is very much focused on high net worth individuals, where Poncho was basically focused on anyone. And so, with PVIG, which is Pine View Insurance Group, we write the home, auto, umbrella, et cetera, policies of high net worth families. And we built this amazing experience that's really designed for family offices. So we focus on family offices and then bring that experience down to high net worth individuals. And so the experience is really about high level of service, no sending two emails to get one response, quick responses that are thorough and done right, and giving the clients confidence that they have the right situation. So, be it benchmarking tools, different things that basically just give confidence that the family has the right insurance, and doing it with a super high level of service.
Awesome. Um, it's funny when you were talking about Poncho, and as you were describing, or as you were describing Poncho, I was like, this sounds familiar. And then as you connected to PVIG, I'm like, oh, this is a way to make up for the past in a big way. So love the focus. And then so 5 Base is the holding company structure. You have PVIG serving, insurance agency, home and auto, high net worth individuals. Now, you care to speak about the other company under this umbrella? Is that,
Yeah.
yeah?
So recently announced it, so I'm happy to unveil more information. So coincidentally, having spent time looking at the wildfire risk, I was very interested in what kind of technologies can help sort of bend the loss curve and reduce wildfire risk. And so focused on looking at a bunch of technologies, and eventually found one that I became very partial to, and ended up acquiring a company in early December called FireZat. And so that business is essentially, for easiest way to describe it, a full building fire blanket. So you essentially take these large sheets of aluminum foil, and there's more to it than aluminum foil, but it looks like aluminum foil. And you basically put it on a house when a wildfire is in the area. And 90% of structures ignite because embers essentially fly through the air and land somewhere and heat up some part of the house, and then the whole thing goes. And so when you put this stuff over your house or any structure, basically the embers bounce off, or they will sit there and burn out if it does stick and not actually get to the structure. So, it's a proven technology, and FireZat has done a great job for 20 plus years of basically building the business to a place where someone like me can come in and really accelerate a lot of the efforts. And so in many ways, the plan is to sort of lean into the insurance industry, and you can see how it would help them, and then hopefully also help consumers, because there's just a lot of opportunity to reduce risk there from my perspective.
Yeah, oh, it's fascinating. I mean, I think Buyer's Ed too combines that engineering. You're a mentor, some of the things you guys were doing with insurance, with business, and it seems like a perfect recipe for all the things that you know how to do. But Mike, I love getting to know you. I love seeing your interests evolve, expand, branch out, and just seeing how you do things. So appreciate your time today. And where can people find you, 5Bs, companies, etc.?
So probably the best place to go would be pvig.com.
Mm.
So my email is ml@pvig.com. And if you want to track the 5 base capital journey, because we're just getting started, we'll acquire more companies and build more companies. That is 5basecapital.com. Five, but actually spelled out FIVE, Base Capital. But yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me, Bryan.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The One Away Show with Mike Lloyd. What struck me most about Mike is how deeply he lives the idea that nothing worth building comes easy. From academic pressure to startup setbacks to strategic exits, Mike's path has been anything but linear. And yet, it has all shaped him into a leader who builds with integrity and long-term vision. Whether it's launching a high-touch insurance agency or acquiring a wildlife protection company, Mike's work is about solving real problems with clear purpose. If this episode resonated, I'd love if you shared and left a review. And don't forget, we release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, keep chasing hard-earned wins. They usually matter most.